I'm interviewing Catherine Gosser. This interview is taking place at Catherine's house, 17061 Corona Road, Chesaning, Michigan, 48616. My sponsor is the Chesaning High School, and the date this interview took place was January 6th, 1990.
Okay. What do you remember about the type of chores you had to do when you were young?
Well, we started out in the morning. We didn't have it as convenient as they do today. There was 11 in our family. My grandpa stayed with us all his life. I never knew it not to have him. I had 5 brothers and 3 sisters, and Mom and Dad. And we had a big farmhouse, had 3 bedrooms. Mom and Dad's bedroom was downstairs. Great-grandpa and the 4 boys had 1 room, and my 2 sisters and I had another room. That was, when we get up in the morning, we'd go downstairs and wash our hands, and we'd get breakfast. The boys would get up and they'd go out and do chores, take care of the horses, get them ready for out in the field, feed them and grain them and get them ready to go. And then they'd come in and have breakfast. We girls would have breakfast ready for them. We'd sit down and eat breakfast. The boys would get up and go back out and harness the horses and head for the field. We girls would do up the dishes and we'd head for the field too. We'd work all day, come noon. Usually I was elected to go up and get lunch. I'd go up and get lunch ready. We'd eat lunch. After lunch, the boys would get to go and lay down for an hour, but we girls had to do up the dishes and clean up the kitchen. Then we'd all go back out in the field. Come night, we'd come up. The boys would take care of the horses. We girls would do the dishes and clean up the house and get ready for the next day. We baked our own bread. One of us would stay in the house one day if we had to bake bread, because that took all day. Start the bread in the morning. When I was 9 years old, I could bake bread by myself. We didn't bake 1 loaf or 2 loaves. We made 10 or 12 loaves. We'd do that twice a week. We'd bake bread. Never thought of having a loaf of homemade bread. Once in a while on Sunday morning for a treat, when we'd come home from church, we'd go around by Layton, we'd stop and Daddy'd pick up 3 pounds of big hot dogs or a ring of bologna, and that would be our Sunday morning breakfast, and that was a treat. That didn't happen every week. That was when he had an extra $1 in his pocket, and that's how he'd spend it. But when I go back to when I was a little girl going to school, we never had perms and had our hair fixed up. I never had a permanent until after I graduated from the 8th grade. And then we'd go and go to these schools where these girls were studying to be beauticians, and they'd give us perms. We'd get a permanent for $1. Every once in a while we'd get a good burn on our head, but we didn't mind. We wanted to be beautiful. But nowadays they wouldn't think of doing something like that. They pay $20, $30, $40 for a perm, and they want one every 3-4 months. But that's why the world is what it is. There's too much money in circulation. It's too easy to get money. But when I was a little girl, when I went to school, I can remember like it was yesterday. My daddy would give me a nickel for a tablet. Well, I had run out of paper, so I borrowed from this one and borrowed from that one, and the time I'd get all these paid back that I had borrowed from, I didn't hardly have any tablet left. Pretty soon I was out of paper again. And Grandpa would say, well, I just gave you a nickel. What'd you do with it? I used it. I didn't waste it. That's why today I can't see these kids going like this on a sheet of paper and throwing it away. Because when I was in school, I didn't even have school necessity paper for school. And it made it hard.
What was a typical work day like?
Monday was wash day. We'd get up in the morning. We didn't have electricity or anything. We had a great big boiler. We'd start fire in the wood stove and fill that boiler with water. The time Mom got up, it was getting hot. Then we'd make breakfast. The time we got all done, Mom, with our breakfast, then Mom, she'd go to her washing over a scrub board. And it'd take her, some days she couldn't even get it all done in one day. She'd let them in overhauls and things for the next day, put them in that water and soak them, and then the next day she'd go back and finish her washing. And then Tuesday was usually ironing day. Everything was taken down and folded. We didn't iron like they do today. We starched everything, hung it out on the clothesline, got it dry. Then we'd bring it in and dampen it and roll it up and put it in a clothes basket. Tuesday was ironing day. Sometimes it'd take all day to iron. Well, Rita, she didn't like housework, so she usually got to go out and follow behind a plow and work with my dad. But I stayed in the house and done the ironing and always was with my mother. I loved to clean and cook and bake, and I do to this day. You know that. And that's why I like it, because that's the way I was brought up. That's all I ever knew. There wasn't such a thing as a box cake or a box mix. Anything we made from scratch. My mother made cream cakes without recipe. She put in a couple cups of sugar and 2 eggs and a little butter and beat it up good and put in some milk or whatever and flour and baking powder. And that was her cake, and always turned out.
Do you remember other certain chores that you had to do on certain days?
Well,
Other than wash and iron?
Friday was cleaning day. Friday we went through the house and cleaned. But on Monday was wash day. We'd wash the bedding. We'd do everything. And Tuesday was ironing day. I don't remember what Wednesday was, but I know Mother sewed a lot, and she done a lot of mending, so I imagine probably she done that. I never done any of that. Mother always done the sewing and the making and that kind of. Always made our skirts. Never thought of buying a new dress, getting a new dress. Mother made all our skirts and blouses and pajamas, and we never had clothes like they have today. When we go to school, we'd have one pair of socks, and we'd have one pair of mittens if we was lucky. We had mittens. If we didn't, we had to put our hands in our pockets to keep them warm. Of course, with me having an older sister, I never got too much new clothes. I had usually took the hand-me-downs, and but they fit me, and I always looked nice. I never. But there was no money in circulation like there is today. It wasn't only myself. It was everybody, and everybody was in the same. Of course, there was always a few had a little bit more than what we did. You know how that goes, and we kind of envied them at the time, but we got used to it. We were a very happy family. We never ever went away from the table hungry. Daddy, in the fall of the year, he always butchered his own pigs and beef and chickens, and we always had cream. We made our own butter, eggs. We never bought any of that stuff. That all came right off the farm. Of course, we didn't think that was so good. We didn't enjoy it then. We'd rather go to town, get a ring of bologna or some hot dogs. That was a treat to us.
Is there anything else you remember about the chores that you had to do?
That I had to do? Like get up in the morning and make the boys' beds every morning before I went to school, clean their room. The boys in my days it wasn't equal rights. The boys done their things outside and the girls done everything inside, and then they had to go outside and work in the fields too. When the boys would come home, they'd get rests and breaks, and the girls never did. My mother never did. My mother was a hard worker. But other than the washing, ironing, cooking, cleaning, mending, that was just about the extent of my work. Now, my sister Rita, she used to work outside a lot. She'd rather work out in the barn, milk the cows, and work with the boys than she would in the house. And she's that way today. She can go out in the garden, and man, she can have a beautiful garden and lawn and flowers. I'm just not interested in that. I never done it, and to tell you the truth, I don't know how to have a good garden and beautiful flowers, because I never done it in my life. I'd probably either plant them too deep or leave them lay on top.
Being on a farm, did you see any differences between the work you had to do and that of kids not on a farm?
Well, where I lived, everybody was farmers. And when we went to school, it was just a country school. They were all farmers. I really don't think there was any. I don't remember any that didn't work on the farms. They were all farmers. Some of these farm men had other jobs. I remember one man, he had the Maytag sales ship, and they had money. They had more money than what we did, but he had 2 jobs, and I don't know how they operated at home, but I couldn't say they was any happier than we were. We were just as happy doing what we done and having what we had, because in the evening when it would come after supper, one of the neighbors might come over, and we might sit down and have apples and popcorn. Of course, we didn't go to town and buy it. We had the apples in the basement, and my mother had raised the popcorn. So we took the popcorn. We'd always have popcorn, and that would be our treat at night. If the neighbors would come over, we'd play cards, and we didn't have a radio. I remember when I was quite a big girl already, and when Amos and Andy was on the radio, and our neighbors had a radio and had one of these great big horns sitting on top of it. Every Friday night we'd go to the neighbors, that particular neighbor, and watch Amos and Andy. And we look forward to that as much as you children do going to a movie and spending $15, $20. And it didn't cost us a penny. We went to the basement and got the popcorn and apples. Us girls made them while the grown-ups played cards. And then we thought that was great to treat our neighbors with popcorn and apples.
Could you describe some of the other differences that you remember between men's and women's chores?
Well, like they say, and it's more truth than words. A man works from sun to sun. A woman's work is never done. Because even when you go to bed at night, you're thinking about what you're going to make for breakfast in the morning. And do I have this? And do I have everything that it takes? I have to go to the basement and get we used to fry down meat and pack it in lard and put it in the basement. Well, then when we wanted it, all we'd do is just go down and get it and put it in a fry pan if that's what we wanted. Or we can sausage if we'd want sausage and eggs. Potatoes, we always had potatoes. Daddy raised potatoes and had bins and bins of potatoes and carrots and cabbage and all that. We never bought anything. The only thing that I can remember that my mother ever used to say she'd have to have would be laundry soap, and then we used this PG bar soap, and if we had something that was real bad and we wanted some real good, we'd grate up a little bit of that and put it on the stove to boil and make it like into a liquid, and then we put it in our wash tubs, not machines, wash tubs, with a washboard over it. Then we'd go ahead, and that's the way we do that part of it, our washing. So it took a lot longer. Nowadays, you throw a load of wash in, you can go ahead and get a meal, or you can go ahead and iron, or you can go ahead and do another day's work. But in those days, when you wash, you didn't do anything. You stood over that washboard all day long. Mom used to stand right there, and we girls used to hang it out on the lines, and she'd still be washing when we'd be taking wash down. That's how long it would take. But the men, they'd go out and do their chores. 6 o'clock, they'd come up for their supper, and they'd take care of those horses, and their work was done. They could do as they please. Of course, my dad, he'd have to do the repairing on the tools and things and keep them up, but there was days when he'd stay right up in the tool shed and take care of the tools, and the boys would go out and do the farming. And Rita.
Can you describe, in more detail, how you did the washing without a washing machine?
How we did it? We had wash tubs. These round, we had a bench where you set them on. You set one tub on this side, and that's where you washed. Then you had a wringer that you'd wring them through by hand, and then there was a tub of rinse water over here. Then you'd rinse them out of that, and then you swing this wringer around and run them through the rinse water. I've seen the time when my mother was washing, Rita was running them through the wringer, and I was hanging them out on the clothesline. We was all three working right at one day's wash. And we wouldn't get done there, and we'd be out taking it down and folding it and dampening it for the next day. And then we'd iron all day. We'd take turns ironing, Rita and I. Mom, she usually had other things like preparing the meals and things like that. And once a year we'd butcher. We'd butcher that would be our meat then. We'd make sausage, and we'd make head cheese and fry meat down, and have crocks and crocks. And for about 3 days, our house looked like a cyclone struck, because we was making sausage, frying down meat, and then Mom used to have she'd take these hams and and put them in sugar cure brine and leave them like that, and we'd use them out of that for a while. Well, you could only leave them so long, and then you'd have to take them out and have them smoked. Then they'd take them out to the smokehouse and smoke them. And then they'd keep all winter.
Could you describe cooking without electricity?
Yeah, it wasn't hard. We cooked just as good as they cook today. We had a wood range, And that's another thing that the boys would do in the wintertime a lot of times when there wasn't any farming to do. They'd go out and make wood. Go out in the woods and make wood. So we'd have our wood to last all winter long. And we had a range that we cooked on, and we had a heating stove in the living room that kept us warm. And they'd go out at night. Somebody'd have to get up early in the morning. That's where my grandpa came in. He loved to build fires and work, and that was usually what he would do. He'd usually keep the fires going if he could bank it good enough at night, so he didn't have to start it in the morning. Just shake ashes down and put in some wood and get it going. And then when we children would get up, it'd be nice and warm until he got quite old. That usually was his job, taking care of the fires. And when the same thing when they'd butcher, he'd keep the fire under the feed cooker going so that they'd have that water to scald the hogs in. And everybody had their work. It's not like it is today. We never thought of going away. In fact, I don't think I ever had a date until I was out of school and working on my own. Used to think I had a boyfriend, like had my and the neighbor boy, but that's just as far as that went. Of course, we didn't go through high school neither. Those days, anybody that went through high school had to have money. And today, look how you children go to college, and you don't think anything of it. But that's why there's money in circulation, and that's why you can do those things.
What do you recall about preparing like the food to store for the winter, like canning, and you said you smoked meat?
Oh, we always can. We can bushels and bushels of peaches and pears, string beans, corn. There wasn't anything, we didn't have the freezers, but it was all in cans. My mother would can as high as 600 quarts in a year's time, and that would last us from one year to the next. But that was every year we canned. Bought peaches for $1 a bushel. What do you pay today? 15?
I don't know.
And then the same way with sugar. Daddy had sugar beets. When he'd take his sugar beets to town, he'd get his supply of sugar for the winter months. When he'd take his wheat to the mill, to the farm, take his wheat up, then he'd take so much and have it made into flour. So we had our flour, sugar. The only thing was coffee and soap. And they did have a way that they made soap, but my mother never really got into that. We never made our own soap. I don't remember of ever making our own soap. They may have earlier in life, but I don't remember it. When my mother would need groceries, about the only things it would be coffee and soap. That was two things that they did buy. But other than that, there wasn't, and then of course her spices, her baking powder and soda and that kind of stuff. But we didn't bake during the week. We never baked any pies or cakes or cookies during the week. That was just weekends. And then sometimes we'd have, if we didn't have lots of company or like that, we'd have cookies and things left over for our lunches. But we didn't just take a cookie anytime we wanted it like you do today. Those cookies were for a reason, and if they were there, that was for our lunches, so that it would make it easier for Mom loved to pack good lunches. But we always had bread, and we didn't have peanut butter. Man, if we'd get a jar of peanut butter, we'd think we was in seventh heaven. But we've always made our own jelly, jams, apple butter, peach preserves. We used to have a tomato recipe that we made, and Mom would put some lemon in it. And that was real good too, but that wasn't any good for school lunches because that would soak, But we always had good lunches. We always ate real well, real good. My dad was a good provider. We never ever went hungry, but we didn't get the things that we thought we'd like better. But like today what do you like today? You like homemade bread because we don't make it all the time. And you like the old-fashioned cookies where I roll them out, and you like those because that's something you don't get every day. There's more work to it. But those are the kinds of things that I enjoy making because I've done it all my life. When I was 9 years old, my mother could go out in the field with the boys, and I could stay in the house and bake bread all by myself. And we didn't have electric stove, and either we had to make sure that fire was. We know just about how to do it. We know just when to put in a nice piece of wood and we had a thing in the oven that told us the temperature. Sometimes we get it a little too warm, but we just open the oven door and let a little of that heat get out. Sometimes we burn it too, then we catch Jessie from my dad. Where was you when the bread was baking? Well, I was right there, but I didn't control the stove quite right. See, you don't have those excuses today.
What sorts of meals did you cook?
3 meals a day, breakfast, dinner, and supper. And they was all meals. They wasn't just a bowl of soup. They was meals. They was potatoes and meat. Bread, potatoes, and meat. Meat, potatoes, and bread, potatoes, and meat. That was our 3 meals. First, vegetables. We had all kinds of vegetables, canned vegetables in the winter. In the summer, why, we'd go out and have our garden. Fresh vegetables and lettuce and stuff out of the garden. But now, they'd rather go to the store and buy it because they don't have to prepare it. When you go out in the garden to get it, you had to make sure it was clean, there was no grass in it, and then you'd wash it. Your lettuce you'd wash leaf by leaf. And it was no fast meals like it is today. You'd get done with breakfast and you'd start your dinner. You'd make your menu, what you was going to have and what you had to do. Go out in the garden and get the lettuce. Go out and dig the potatoes. Go out and get the carrots. Everything was there, but you just had to go get it and prepare it. A lot of work connected.
What do you remember about how the lack of indoor plumbing, did it affect your work or your chores?
We didn't have any indoor plumbing. We didn't have a bathroom. We had the outdoor bathrooms, and when we'd take a bath in the summertime, we'd get that round tub, mother's wash tub, warm us some water and carry pails of water out there, out in the outdoor house. And that's how we take our bath, and then just lower the water out the door when we got done. And like the kitchen sink, when the last few years when we had the sink, it was just a piped outside, and that's where the wastewater went. Would run over some stones and things, to kind of take care of the odor and like that. Wash water, we never had a drain or anything where our wash water went. We carried it in pails and we carried it out in pails.
Could you describe how you acquired your clothes?
Our clothes? My mother made most of our clothes. She'd just buy the material, and every Christmas, we didn't have Christmases like they do today. When at Christmas time the table was set and everybody had a plate. When we ate, we never sat down anywhere. Everybody had their own spot where they sat. And then when Christmas time, we'd set our plate, set the table. And when Santa Claus would come, he'd put some peanuts and candy on that plate. And usually we girls usually got enough material for a new skirt. And if times were just right, we'd get a pair of socks or a pair of mittens, whichever we needed the worst, for a Christmas gift. That would be extra. We'd have our clothes for school. But for school, we had 1 pair of socks, 1 pair of shoes, 2 outfits. And that was our school clothes. That we never had, like you do today, shoes with every skirt and a sweater with every pair of slacks and so on. But we were just as happy, Trina, as you are today, because everybody was in the same situation. It wasn't like I was the only one that didn't have this. There was nobody had it, because it just wasn't. There wasn't such a thing as a wash machine. There wasn't such a thing as a TV. And that's the way it was. And when we cleaned house in the spring, about what it consisted of was paper, painting, and washing and scrubbing. That's what it consisted of. We didn't get new things. My mother didn't have furniture and things like we all had a bed to sleep in. We had a table to eat at, and we had the very necessities to get by. What you would call the necessities today to get by. But everybody had it, and that's all everybody had, so it wasn't any different. But look, they didn't used to have cars. It was all horse and buggy. Well, look at your cars cost you today. Look what it costs to make a car and to buy a car today. Well, that would have more than bought a farm in those days.
What else do you remember about spring and fall cleaning?
In what respect?
Like, did you clean every...
Spring and fall. in the spring is when we'd get the new things. In the fall, they used to have a substance that was a lot like clay, and they called that wallpaper cleaner. And that's what we used to get the smoke and what that we got over. But in the spring, then, we'd usually paper and paint. Anything, there'd usually be 1 or 2 rooms that needed paper and painting, and that would be in the spring of the year. In the fall of the year, there wasn't much use of doing anything other than just cleaning real good, because you set up your stoves and you got a lot of smoke and you know what it's like every time you open the door, how and that's all they used those days. They used it for cooking and heating and everything. Where today in the wintertime you use it for heating. You do. I don't. I got gas, which is a miracle to me. It's just a heaven sent, because to me I didn't mean anything to stoke the furnace, but we couldn't stoke them like you do today. We'd have to do it every hour, where now you do it morning, maybe at noon and night, but usually morning and night is about all, if you stoke them right, and if there's someone here all the time, But we done it every hour, so you know what smoke we had. And in the fall, sometimes the paper was pretty bad, and if you could clean it just so much, and then you had to replace it. And the same way with your floors. We didn't have hardwood floors, and we didn't have carpeting. We had painted floors and linoleums. And it was easy to clean. That was a lot why they had that, because if you'd had carpeting those days like you have today and carry that wood and coal and everything, what would they look like? Where we had just the painted floors, where every Saturday those floors got mopped and waxed. And then it made it easy to clean it all week.
Could you describe how you felt about the amount of work you had to do?
I enjoyed it. We didn't think anything of it. We knew never had to be told what to do. We'd get up in the morning and we knew what Mom would tell us the night before, what we was going to have for breakfast, and we knew what we were going to have, and we knew what our jobs were, and we went ahead and done them. We never complained. It was just automatic. It was just a family. That's the trouble with the world today. Nobody wants to do it. They figure, well, let this guy do it, let that guy do it, and nobody wants to do it, and that's where your problem comes in. It's not a family project anymore. We used to do it and work together, and maybe once a week they might say we done a good job, but it was just automatic. Daddy worked all day, Mother worked all day, we worked all day, thought nothing of it. It was just automatic. Now today you got to take these kids and twist their arm to get their work out of them, and it's harder if they say go and do it than to think about it and try to get out of it and figure out a way. If they just go do it, there'd be nothing to it, and there'd never everything would be done. But the world isn't like that today. In the first place, they got too much going. You know yourself. You go to school, you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you comb your hair, you get dressed, you go to school. How often, how many nights a week can you come home and say, well, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that? You got band, you got cheerleading, you got schoolwork. So how much of the time are you home? We never had anything like that. We walked 2.5 miles morning and night, rain or shine. We come home, the first thing we do is go upstairs and change our clothes, and before we ever come down, we see so all the beds were made. Then we'd come down, and we'd whatever there was to do. Carrying wood was one thing. Get the vegetables up from the basement for Mother, so she wouldn't have to go down the basement steps, because she had 8 children. She was usually doppy. Through pregnancy, you know how that goes. And we'd have to help her. And of course my dad was a farmer, and he couldn't see what she had to do. He had his own. And he was a good provider. He was a very, very good provider. We never, ever in our life went to bed hungry. Never.
What other sorts of things did you have to do for your mom?
Peel the potatoes. Get the vegetables ready. We had to get things ready before we went to school for that day. And if we could do anything at night, we had more time at night, because then we could sleep a little longer in the morning. It wasn't any different than you children. We didn't like to get up in the morning. Of course, we didn't have the convenience. We didn't have a whole warm house to get up to like you do today, but we didn't like to get up neither. So if we could do our little chores like get the potatoes up and peel them for Mom for the next day, or if we could, whatever we could do to help for the next day so we could sleep a little longer, because we had to do our work before we went to school, and if we had to run all the way to school, we had to do our work first. We had 2.5 miles. We knew how long it would take. We'd like to get our work done so that we could go out and meet the neighbors and walk to school with the neighbors and didn't have to hurry. But sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we'd forgot to mend our socks and we'd have to do it in the morning, and it took time, and then we'd be late and then we'd be way behind all the rest, and we'd have to run and catch up. Because we never, ever, ever was taken to school. It didn't matter if it was rain or shine. We walked to school morning and night, 2.5 miles.
You mentioned that you had to butcher the pigs.
My dad butchered once a year, and that was enough. He'd butcher enough meat to last him. Once in a while in the wintertime, if he'd happen to have a pig with a broken leg or something, why, he'd butcher that. But that was about a week's project. It'd take us at least 3 days to butcher. Not to kill the pig, of course, but to cut it up, to make the sausage, to fry the meat down, and you'd have to let it cool overnight, because you had to let all that animal heat get out of it before you could do anything. And then we'd render our own lard. We always had our own lard. We'd render our lard. When they'd butcher, they'd get enough. They'd have the pigs fat enough so that we'd get enough lard and that's how, like when it come to making pies and baking cakes, we never had Crisco and that kind of stuff. We used our own lard. And but that butchering, I don't like that. That was messy. I was always glad when that was done. That was a nasty job when it come to we had just the wood floors, and you happen to drop a little piece of meat or a little piece of that fat on the floor. Ooh, was that slippery.
Were there any other of the certain chores that you didn't like?
No. Emptying the slop jar. I didn't like that job either, but it had to be done every morning before we went to school.
Now, what was that?
That's if we'd have to get up during the night, to use the bathroom. It was just urinal, but it had to be taken care of every morning. But there was, you see, I told you there was 9 of us upstairs, and we had one in the hall that everybody could use. And then 1 week I'd have to take care of it, and 1 week Reta'd have to take care of it. But never the boys. Oh, no, not the boys. That's just a little bit, although I don't know, I think we was happier than what they are today, because, okay, now just like you figure El should make his bed. Yes, it don't hurt them today to make their bed, because they don't have the work. But if Albert would keep the garage cleaned, and keep the cars washed, and do outside what our boys done, then you wouldn't have any excuse. But they don't do that today. They figure equal rights, and I think that was the biggest mistake ever made. Equal rights. How can you have equal rights? How about a man taking his turn having a baby if they want equal rights?
But did you think that the amount of work that you had to do was fair, because you had to do the work in the house and then go outside and help, and the boys got to rest? How did you feel about that when you were young?
No, we didn't think that was fair. But we didn't dare say one word, because my dad was all for the boys, and my mother was just a real little woman, and she'd say, now don't cause any trouble, just go do it. So that's the way they raised us. Just go do it. So we just went and done it. And it wears on you. You get used to it. No, I don't think that was quite fair. I think when they had an hour's nap, then they should have went out and worked an hour before I think we should have had a nap too, but we didn't. And we're still living. Healthy as can be. That was the only thing that I didn't quite think was right with the boys and girls, but that's what I tried to tell you about making Elle's bed.
You mentioned that you made butter. Made butter?
Oh yeah, churned our own butter.
How did you do that?
Well, see, we had cows, and they milked them, and we'd separate the cream from the milk. The skim milk would go to the pigs. We was raising pigs, and then we would take the cream and put it in a big jar. When we get just so much and it was sour, then we didn't have a churn like they do today. We'd put it in a syrup pail. And every so often we'd have to open it up and let the air out and start over again until we got butter. That's how we made our butter.
You didn't have to churn it?
We didn't have to churn it. We had to shake it. We didn't have a churn, but in the later years we had a churn. We had one of these that goes like this, but that wasn't big enough for 11 people. So we had one of these that stomp, you know. It was just a round, you've seen these round churns, and they have a wooden paddle in them. Then you just paddle that like this, just up and down, up and down, up and down, and that's how we made butter. Because there was, you know, the little churn wouldn't be big enough. You'd have to make it every day. And Mother had it set so we made so much, and that would last so many days, and then we'd have to churn butter again. And you know, as you go on with these things, you know just about how much the family eats.
Do you ever remember earning privileges due to the amount of work you did?
No. Well, yes. Now, I shouldn't say no. Yes. About once a month, Daddy would take us uptown on Saturday night and give us each a nickel. That's what we worked for. We didn't work day by day and get a surprise every day. We got a surprise about once a month. And now, believe me, if one didn't do what they were supposed to or didn't do right, they didn't go to town. It's not like it is today. When my daddy said something, that was law, and we never questioned it. That was it. If he said, okay, now you can't go to town this month because this Saturday or whenever it would have been the next time, you can't go to town the next time because you didn't do your work. And so we just didn't go to town. It wasn't like when it come time to go to town, maybe we could go anyway. No. If he said something, that was law. And we knew it, and we never questioned it. We never forgot it. We knew when we was going and when we wasn't. We worked pretty hard for that. Because that was a great thing. What did we do uptown? Just walk the streets and showing people that we was good. That we had been good, that we could go to town.
What do you recall were the similarities or differences between the chores then and the chores today?
Well, they don't have horses today. They have these great big tractors with the radios on them and the hoods over them so they don't get no sunshine or so they don't get rain, so they don't get wet when they... Just all the difference in the world. And all the tools, all you have to do is just hook that on behind your tractor and go. Where you used to have to brush those horses, feed those horses, water them and green them every morning, noon, and night, 3 times a day.
Do you see any differences in the chores that you had to do inside?
Oh, definitely. You know what I told you about washing? What do I do today? Throw a load in and forget about it. I can go on as if it's never... I'm doing my washing and I don't even know I'm washing. There's nothing to it today compared to what there used to be. You never left that scrub board.
What about, cooking?
Cooking, the younger generation is making it different. Like I said, you don't take a recipe today and put in your eggs and sugar, and you just take it and dump it and get a box and dump it in and put in your water and your egg and put it in the oven. That's all there's to it. You didn't used to do that. You sift your flour. You done all you had. You know, we use a regular bread flour that Mom had, but you'd have to sift it 2-3 times to make it lighter. It was so heavy that if you just dip in it and use it like that, your cake wouldn't rise. You'd have a heavy cake. It could be done, but it wasn't. It was a lot of work to it. And but I can't. One thing I can't see any different in yet is pies. Now, when you make your pie dough today, of course, I guess you can buy pie shells too, but I never have. And there's about the same amount of work to pies as it was when I made them back umpteen years ago. But like your cakes now, they don't hardly make a cake today from scratch. That's why Uncle Jack and the Bishop family like my spice cakes well, because I put in a lot of raisins and nuts and molasses, and it's from scratch. It's not a box cake. You know these box cakes, how light and fluffy they are. Well, you didn't make cakes like that in those days. Your cake was heavier. It wasn't nice and fluffy like it is today. For the simple reason that you didn't have the ingredients in it, you know.
How did things change as your family acquired more modern conveniences, whether it was when you were young or after you were married? Or
how? In what respect do you mean?
How did your work change? Our
work?
Yeah, did it get...
Well, it changed just like everything else. I went, when I was a young girl, a teenage, I went to Flint, and all I done was took care of 2 little children and got paid good money for it. I stayed there. They furnished my uniform. I had my room and board, and they paid me good money. That was the difference. Then after I got married, then I went to the shop and brought home a paycheck just like everybody else. And I didn't live after I was married like my mom and dad lived. And you are not going to live, when you're married, you're not going to live like I live. Everything keeps, the question is, how far is this going to go? How much longer can things keep improving? Look at your airplanes today. There wasn't such a thing as an airplane. Look at your electricity. There wasn't such a thing as electricity. What are they going to do next?
Did you acquire many modern things when you were young? Did you ever have electricity when you were living with your parents?
We did have electricity. They got electricity through, but I don't remember of my mother ever having my mother never had a electric wash machine. She did have one with an engine on it that used gas when I was home yet. That was her first and only and last machine that she had. She never had an electric refrigerator as long as I can remember. She had an ice box. And where you put the ice in, it was just to keep things cool in it. But my mother never even used that a whole lot because she had a basement, and it had a cement floor, and she'd keep one spot wet down and keep it nice and cool, and that's where we'd put our butter and but we never had cold meats, cold cuts, and things like that to keep like you have today. You couldn't keep those things. We never had those things. But that kept our butter, our milk. Of course, we had fresh milk every morning and night. We didn't have to keep that too long, but we always liked to take and cool it real good and then keep a jug cool for drinking in the basement.
How did your work change? Did you seem to you said you worked from morning till night.
Right.
Did you seem to get more done and have more time to do less when you...
We never was done. On the farm, we never was done. But there was a time when we had plenty of time to play and do what we wanted to do, but we didn't do things like they do today. When we would play, we'd go out. My brother Bob was crippled, and he had an axle with 2 wheels on it off of a buggy. And of course, he needed that to get around. And we never left him out of any of our play. We always had him in it. We had more fun with a buggy axle than you guys ever thought of having with all the new equipment that you ever got. Because when we'd get out there to play with that was playing. That time was our own. We wasn't working. But we didn't regret work. We just automatically done it because we knew what we had to do. But if we done real good, then we'd get some time off too. We'd get rewards just like you do today, only they was a lot different than what yours are today.
Mm-hmm. Did your work get easier as, like you said, your mother got a new washing machine and you got electricity? Did that
she thought she was in 7th heaven when she got that washing machine with a motor on it, with a gas motor on it. She'd put in her gas and oil every morning, and oh my, that was easy. But what do we do today? All we do is throw it in and pull a button. So we don't have to monkey with no gas or oil or anything in that respect. Yes, it's much easier. That's why women get bored. They don't have enough to do today.
In what ways do you or don't you think that your responsibilities to your chores helped you later in life?
Definitely, my chores helped me later in life. I enjoy working to this day. Now, you've told me time and again, Grandma, how come you enjoy working? You think I'm crazy. But that's my life. That's all I ever done, and I still enjoy it. I love to make people happy, but in other respect, I can't do it all because it spoils you rotten.
But do you think that the chores that you did you think your parents were too hard on you in that ways?
No, never questioned that. It didn't hurt me a bit. They worked all the time. If my dad would have sat there and told me, or sat there and done nothing, I thought my dad should have got on him once in a while and said, come on now, it wouldn't hurt you to help a little bit too, but we didn't dare question it because, well, no matter what my dad said, it was right. And if he'd have told you to go out there and move the earth, you'd have went out and tried it and done your best.
Do you think anything has been lost in the modern conveniences of today?
Yes. Being a family and working together as a family. I think that's the biggest, I think that's why we have so many divorces and so many crimes and so much of what's going on into the world today, because families don't work together. What do you want me to say? Oh,
I want, yeah, tell a
you
story
want me to
about
tell the story about how my mother used to get material for our dresses?
Yeah.
Okay, they used to buy chicken feed and hog mash or whatever they called it for when they fed the hogs in material. And when they'd go, my mother'd always go along and she'd pick out pretty patterns, bring them home, and then she'd make Dad real careful so he didn't tear them. Then when they got emptied, she'd take them in and take them all apart and wash them, and that would be how she'd make a lot of our dresses. Sometimes it'd take two. She'd get a print on the bottom and just a plain material, and that's what she'd use. That'd be with a printed skirt and a plain top. But she always went along and picked them out because that's what she used for our dresses. I don't think Arlene got into that too much. I think time Arlene came along, she was pretty well spoiled. She got material, real material from the store. But they had more money then. Daddy was working for Roach Canning Company.
Is that how you got a lot of the material to make your dresses?
That's how she got most of the material to make our dresses. Yeah. And we had an awful lot of hand-me-downs too. You know, there was big families. My mother was from a large family, and then they'd all kind of work together. If they have a dress that would be too small for their children, why they'd hand them down. And that's the way the world went on those days.
Okay.